For more on the situation with Russia and Ukraine, as we await remarks from President Joe Biden, we have our own Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman here with more. Rick, you heard the update from Jen. What's your read on where things stand now and how likely we are to see a best or worst case scenario as these talks continue?
I have no more of an educated guess on what Russia is going to do than anybody else does. People should keep in mind that it would make sense for Russia to apply maximum military pressure and make it look like they're really about to invade with a massive force in order to get the diplomatic outcome that they want and some of the concessions they're looking for. So I think an invasion is not a done deal until it actually happens. But I think one of the things that President Biden has to do is start explaining what's going on to ordinary Americans. Politicians have been paying close attention to this. Diplomats have, journalists have, but ordinary Americans have not been paying close attention to this. And this is going to affect Americans at least through the economy. We're probably going to see price spikes in energy if something bad happens here. We're probably going to see more of a sell-off in the stock market and more inflation. So, and that's at a minimum. People are also going to be worried what is going on with Russia, a huge military and nuclear power, now starting a ground war in Eastern Europe if that's what happens. So. Biden is going to have to start explaining to the American people in ordinary terms using the bully pulpit and all the things that presidents have at their disposal, a primetime address or other things like that, to start explaining and reassuring to what Americans about what's going on here. So that may be part of what we hear coming up in the next few minutes from the White House.
Rick, there was a point in this broader conflict when China was even brought into the discussion and the conversation as well. What, if any, significance does that still have to this broader conflict? And is the focus now strictly on what Russia will do in terms of the invasion that is anticipated coming from U.S. officials and the White House?
Oh, I mean, it's a global chess game without a doubt. So China does seem to be tacitly or quietly supporting Russia in terms of whatever they do, because Russia and China operate in similar ways in terms of their territorial interests and in what they would consider to be breakaway parts of their country. For China, that's obviously Taiwan, which declared independence in 1949, but China says Taiwan is part of China. So China obviously watching very closely to see what happens in Ukraine because of the implications and consequences that might have for Taiwan. That doesn't necessarily mean China is going to make a military move to re-annex Taiwan, but it's something that Xi Jinping has talked about. He's more of a hardliner than any of the last several leaders in China. And this, of course, affects the U.S. economic relationship with China, which is much more important than the U.S. economic relationship with Russia. So there are many factors here and second and third order consequences. And if Russia does attempt some type of move, there are going to be many consequences. They're going to play out for months. This is not likely to end in a sort of clean black or white way anytime soon if Russia does cross the border.
And Rick, obviously, this is happening during a midterm election year for President Biden. People already sort of pandemic wary. Is this something that the American people, is this something that they are supporting? Do we get a sense of how American people feel about the U.S. getting involved in this and the possible sanctions that might impact the economy?
Again, I think this is something Americans just are not paying attention to this. And one reason they're not paying attention, I mean, look, people are, I don't fault people for not paying attention. People are busy living their lives and getting through challenges. And we know, we talk about this all the time. Inflation is now the top concern for many people who find gas more expensive, food more expensive, rent more expensive. Also, Biden has been pretty clear all along that he doesn't intend to send U.S. troops into any kind of combat mission involving Russia. So I guess people might hear that with one ear and say, well, it's not, at least I don't have to worry about America getting in another shooting war as we were in Afghanistan. But that doesn't necessarily mean this is all going to go Biden's way. I think, one of the things we're not noticing so much right now is that Biden's domestic agenda is crumbling. Democrats in the Senate seem like they've just given up on the Build Back Better legislation. They are now trying to cobble together a few different measures that might make it look like they're doing something to address inflation. No one's really noticing that because Ukraine is now the big story. So if Biden shows what people consider to be strong leadership on this foreign policy issue, it might help his approval rating a little, and it might also distract people from his domestic agenda, which is kind of falling apart. But there's so many ways this could go that I don't think we can predict how this is going to play for President Biden over the next several weeks and months.
Well, and Rick, to that point, is this foreign policy issue now impacting the ability of the Biden administration and lawmakers to make any progress on legislation? Or is this still happening in the background and right now headlines are just being dominated by this geopolitical concern?
No, I don't think foreign policy is getting in the way of domestic issues, but I think inflation is. I think that is really that has just become the top domestic issue for the Biden administration. And if you go back to his plans, the Build Back Better legislation, which included social welfare programs, extending the child tax credit, more help for working parents, green energy transformation, nowhere in that economic agenda going back more than 4 months was there any mention of having to deal with inflation. So inflation has really caught the Biden administration by surprise. And because their majority in the Senate is so thin, it only takes a few Democrats in the Senate to say, look, we need to worry about inflation more than any of these other things. And that's where we're at right now. So I think Congress could Congress doesn't really have much of a role on foreign policy. They can, impose certain types of sanctions or things like that. But this is really the president's bailiwick. And Congress has to fund the government and pass domestic legislation. So they can do all of this at the same time. It's really inflation that is interfering at this point with Biden's domestic agenda.
Given the razor thin nature of the Senate right now, Rick, with the tiebreaker going to the vice president, Kamala Harris, with all of that in mind, it's going to be a midterm election year. We already know that. And so how broadly, especially considering the breakdown of Build Back Better that you just mentioned a moment ago, how much tougher does the administration's agenda get from this point forward after 2022?
Well, Brad, it's even tougher than you just described because the Democrats at the moment do not even have a majority in the Senate because the one senator from New Mexico, Senator Lujan, is recovering from a stroke in New Mexico. So the Republicans actually have a 50-49 majority right now. And the vice president doesn't get to break a tie if it's a 50-49 vote in favor of Republicans. And we're already seeing this handicap the Democrats because they're struggling to get a vote on Sarah Bloom Raskin for that top post at the Federal Reserve. And one of the reasons is the Democrats don't have a majority to get her vote out of committee onto the floor. This could also affect the upcoming Supreme Court candidate who President Biden has not yet named, but he said, of course, he would nominate a Black woman. And Democrats were hoping that would be a real moment of triumph for them. But it's possible that could get snagged with this problem that they don't have a working majority right now. And of course, we don't know when Senator Lujan from New Mexico is going to return. So Democrats had a weak hand at the start when they had just a one vote majority in the Senate at the beginning of last year. They have not played that hand really well. And I don't know that they're really going to get anything done in 2022 that they'll be able to brag about to voters as people go to vote in the November midterms.
And as you bring up the inflation concern being the big weight that we have right now for the Biden administration and approval ratings, what connection do you see between the Russia-Ukraine conflict that we're seeing now, that potentially driving up oil and energy prices? Is that the channel through which we could see some of these approval ratings and really take a hit here and stir up even more concerns for the Biden administration as we have inflation already at the forefront of Americans' minds?
That's it, Emily. And it's not just that. I mean, so in terms of energy markets, a couple things to keep in mind. I mean, this is complicated. So the dire scenario would be if there was a full-out shooting war, and let's say a full-out invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and then either Europe completely boycotted Russian deliveries of oil and natural gas, or Russia weaponized its energy supplies and just cut them off to Europe to make trouble for Europe. And that would cause a lot of trouble for Europe, which does not have enough natural gas to start with. So that would be the dire scenario. And we've had analysts like Dan Dicker was on our air this week saying we could see oil prices getting close to $150 a barrel. That I think they're now around 90. We could see gasoline prices here in the United States not just cresting $4, but approaching $5 per gallon. Now, that's an absolute worst case scenario. And many analysts think that that's not going to happen because even if there is a full-on invasion, European countries really need that Russian energy, and Russia really needs the cash that they get from selling that Russia to many countries. From selling that energy to many countries in Europe. Plus, there are contracts in place, and Russia doesn't want to be seen as breaching contracts, because then it would look like an unreliable supplier of natural gas, and over time, countries that need it might turn elsewhere. So there's a chance that if there is an invasion, the gas will keep flowing and the oil will keep flowing. But even if that happens, we're for sure going to see another price spike in energy markets if there is an invasion.
Well, certainly a lot to watch there. Thank you for breaking all that down for us as we await President Biden. Yahoo Finance's own Rick Newman there.